Good afternoon, everybody. It's Mary Ellen Stites, and I'm here in the Creativity Nest, and it is time for our weekly Teach Me Tuesday. So we talked last week about this month being National Watercolor Month. So I started a series on watercoloring. Last week we talked about doing a watercolor wash with our ink pads and different kinds of paper. So if you missed that, you're going to want to go back and watch that. That's up on YouTube, or it's here on Create With Me, excuse me, Facebook page. So you can catch that. So we're going to continue that same series today with another watercolor technique that you can use in your card making, paper crafting, and stamping fun. So let me take you down to my desk and show you what we're going to do today. So we're going to do something called Emboss Resist. So this is a super easy technique, and I think you're going to really enjoy seeing it, and then hopefully you'll enjoy recreating it in your own crafting time. So you're going to need to do this. To do the one that I'm doing today, you're going to need some of the Fluid 100 watercolor paper that Stampin' Up! Makes, or any other. Excuse me. I got a tickle in my throat. Or any watercolor paper. I love this paper. I like to use watercolor paper because I can use a lot of water, and I'm not going to worry about the water pilling, or about the paper pilling, because sometimes when you're using some papers, it kind of beads up on you and pills, and then you get like fur, and so we don't want that. I'm going to use today the Reasons to Smile stamp set. It's 2 big stamps, and when you're using, I'm going to give you some tips on embossing first. We're going to start with embossing. I'm going to give you some tips on it. It's really important to me to help you do your crafting in the best possible way. So when you're using watercolor paper, there is a little bit of a texture to it, right? So I like to use my Stamparatus when I am doing watercoloring on watercolor paper. So I put my stamp on my Stamparatus, and I'm going to put my piece of paper here. Just making sure I have it in the right spot. Okay. And so then what you're going to do is you're going to use your Versamark pad. If you're not familiar with Versamark, this is a sticky ink. This is a ink that stays wet for a long time. It's clear. And so because it stays wet for a long time, it's easy for us to put our powder onto our project and for it to stay wet. So one of the tips when you're using the Stamparatus is to take your stamp set and put that underneath. Let me get this paper out so I don't confuse you. I'll need that here in a minute. You'll want to put that underneath your platform, and that way when you're inking, it's nice and flat. So I can go ahead and ink that up. I've already done it for you, so I'm not going to worry about that. But I do want to show you that we have these great embossing tools right now. So not that. That does not come with it. So you get the Powder Pal, you get an embossing buddy, you get a brush, and you get these reverse tweezers. And these are fabulous. So let's start with the reverse tweezers. This is a silicone product that when you're using your heat gun, you're not going to melt that. So a lot of times when we use something, sometimes we'll use a tip of something and the heat gun will melt it. So with this, you don't have to worry about it. So what's the embossing buddy? So the embossing buddy is a resin bag, and you're just going to pounce it on your paper. You're going to pounce it on your paper, give it a little rub, and what that does is it's going to take all your fingerprints off and all the oil off your fingers, so that when you put it in the embossing powder, which I've already got this embossed, when you put it in the embossing powder, then you don't pick up all that stray embossing powder and makes your project not look as good as it could look. So I highly recommend the embossing powder or embossing buddy. So then you're going to pour your powder over your project just like this. Pour it on there. You can tap it off in your Powder Pal. If you've got any stray pieces, or you'll see them, it's going to be wet, but you'll just take your brush and brush those off just like that. So I'm seeing here I had a little bit there. but I embossed it already, so we'll see that when I color. And then this can be just unscrewed and tapped back into your container. So that's what this is fantastic for. So if you're going to do any kind of embossing, I highly recommend that you get this embossing toolkit because it's really, really fabulous. So let's go ahead and and the reason I like to use the Stamparatus, I didn't really hit on that, is because the watercolor paper has got a texture to it. It's always great to ink it, stamp it. You're going to ink it, you're going to stamp it, you're going to ink it again and keep it in place and stamp it. And you can do that 2 or 3 times and then you'll get a really nice image. Because there's a texture to it, then you won't have any, like, I'll say hiccups for lack of a better term, when you are doing that. So I'm going to bring in that paper again. And here's my piece that I have pre-embossed. The other tip I want to give you is when you're using your heat tool to emboss, okay, this is something I see often. Now, our stamp heat tool has 2 settings. So sometimes that's confusing to people. The very first setting is for if you're trying to dry your paper or just dry your watercolor, you don't want it too hot and blowing, then use the first one. If you're going to emboss, you must use the second one. So there's 2 levels. There's 1 and there's 2. Okay, so when I'm using my embossing tool, I like to go all the way to tool 2, and then I hold my hand over it. Now it's going to get hot, but I like to hold my hand over it until I can't stand it anymore. There's a reason for that. There's a reason not to start right away. Let it go, okay? Then when you go to emboss, holding your piece, of course I'm going to be using my tweezers. I'm not bothered that this is going long. That's okay. I want to hold it in one place and move my heat tool as I see that get shiny. Doing this, you're going to miss a lot of things, especially when you're doing it tone on tone. So if I start in one corner and I move my heat tool slowly, and because I've waited and let it get really, really hot, then I have better luck with things melting quicker and I'm not getting my paper to curl. So those are my embossing tips today. I hope they help you. So just work your heat tool methodically. You'll see it kind of get glossy, working it back and forth. And that way you don't miss anything. So many times you'll take your heat tool and you go like this, and then you go to put your watercolor on and you've got powder. So we don't want that. So that's the reason that I like to teach that you just start in one place and work your way across your project. So I've got this all embossed in white on watercolor paper. And what I did here is I took a clear block and I just took my ink refills and I added 4 different colors. And I'm using a water painter. I'm using the middle tip for this project. And you're just going to make sure always to have some paper towels handy. I like to squeeze it. And I talked about last week, I like to have my paper pre-wet. You don't have to do this. I just like to have it. I feel like my water flows a little better if my paper is wet and it's wet where I want it to be wet. So I'm just wetting my paper because then when I lay down my color, it's going to move a little bit easier for me. That's the reason I do it. So I'm going to pick up some of the green, and I'm using Parakeet Party. There's some greenery right up here. And all I'm doing is adding some color. And as I add that color, you'll see the embossing kind of pop a little bit. Can you see it popping a little bit? So you can see that color coming out. Now, if I'm going to change colors, just like using a blender pen, you're going to just squeeze and pat until it comes out dry. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull in my Tahitian Tide. I'm squeezing as I go, and I'm adding water. I want this to start out light. Okay. You can pick up the color without squeezing, and it's going to be dark. So see the difference if I'm not squeezing. I get a little bit darker effect. If I just pick it up straight, direct, I like it lighter, but that's just me. there's sometimes when I want it dark. So then I'm going to squeeze and pat until that's clean. And then I'm going to pick up my, oh, this is gorgeous grape. So it's going to be really dark. So I squeezed out quite a bit of water there. Well, it's still really dark. Okay, that's okay. Pulling that color. Just making sure you can see it okay. Let me know if you can't. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. I'm going to show you the finished card here in a minute. Now, there's a couple of flowers on this image, and so I'm taking Sweet Sorbet. I'm going to squeeze out some water. Start light. Don't worry about covering up your embossing. It's a resist, so that's going to kind of disappear. Now, this is kind of cool how that water kind of bled around. I like that. I'm going to push it kind of around this way too. I kind of like the way that looks. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. Try to get it makes my image kind of outlined. All right, so there's my color. And what I did is I kind of made a frame without really knowing that's what the plan was. So then I can let it dry. I can use my heat tool on the #1 setting. I talked to you about that earlier. Just using the #1 will kind of dry some of that water off. Okay, and then I can take my paper towel and do a little blotting. Just always switching so I don't mix my colors. I'm kind of always moving my paper towel around. So that is what my image is going to look like, just like so. And let me show you the finished card. Okay, so this one, I took this and I cut it out. Now I did the finished card a little bit different, same stamp. But what I did was I put the gorgeous grape on one side, Tahitian tide on the other, and then I did pretty much the same there. I stamped the starburst background, and when I stamped this, I took my spritzer and I spritzed it. So I kind of wanted to get that watercolor look. It kind of helped it blend and bleed just a little. It's not super crisp. It's hard to see on the camera, but in person, it's just softened. And then I added some of the new in color dots onto that. So super, super pretty. I hope that you'll use this. I hope you enjoyed learning about that and that those tips for embossing were helpful. So thank you for tuning in, everybody. I'll see you later. Bye.